I said that so many times. I know I've said this like 12 times.
All right, so last time we met, about a week ago. Oops. All right, so last time we met about a week ago, we were looking at schedules of reinforcement. So we were talking about the four basic types of schedules of reinforcement. So this is when you're not reinforcing every single instance of a behavior. You're reinforcing it only once in a while or intermittently. And we took a look at the fixed ratio schedule of reinforcement and the characteristic behavior that it led to, which was rapid responding followed by a post-reinforcement pause. We took a look at the variable ratio schedule of reinforcement, which also leads to rapid responding, however, with no reinforcement pause. And then we took a look at, we ended it up with the fixed interval schedule of reinforcement, where the first response after an interval has elapsed is reinforced. Nothing that goes on in that interval is reinforced. And the example we ended up with on this one was of the children who are getting checked on by their guardian every 10 minutes. So the only thing that matters is not what they're doing during that 10 minutes. The only thing that matters is when that door is open, are they going to be playing together nicely? That's what's going to get reinforced. So they can be doing whatever they want, playing together roughly in an inappropriate manner for as long as they want, as long as once that door is open, they're hugging it out and being cooperative. And we saw that this leads to this characteristic scalloped responding, where if you don't have a watch, okay, so again, this is working with your own biological timer, that after the reinforcement, after the period has elapsed, you'll see a post-reinforcement pause. So the individual will learn that they don't have to respond early in the interval because it doesn't matter what happens early in the interval. However, as the interval gets closer to expiring, if you don't know exactly how long it's been because you don't have a watch, you basically start to wonder, has it been 10 minutes? Should I start, hugging my sister right now? Are we even closer now? Are we even closer? So what you get is you get this increased rapid responding that leads to this accelerated little scoop that we see for the characteristic scallop responding, until right before the interval expires, the subject or the organism will be responding very, 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 very quickly until they're reinforced, and then they'll go back down to their post-reinforcement pause. And for your sniffy exercises, you will play sniffy on a fixed interval schedule where you will reproduce this scalloped pattern. And just a reminder, for all of these where you need to put sniffy on an intermittent schedule, when you're expanding the schedule for variable ratios, and then for each of the other three schedules, you need to take it up to a level 50 schedule. So for example, here for full points, you need to put sniffy on a fixed interval 50-second schedule, where the first response after 50 seconds is the one that's going to be reinforced. So what you want to do is you want to bring sniffy along gradually. So regardless of what schedule sniffy just finished, even if he was on another intermittent schedule of a strength of 50, for example, you have to bring him along on this new schedule gradually. So you can do any numbers that you want. These are my recommended. Start with 5. Once you get that nice scalloped pattern going, move it up to 10. Wait for the scalloped pattern, move it up to 20. Get that scalloped pattern. Because what I'm going to be looking at is that gradual increase and then a scalloped pattern at 50. And occasionally what happens if you don't bring him along gradually, he'll still be responding on this fixed interval 50 schedule, but you won't have that characteristic pattern of behavior. It'll be very erratic, so you won't get that scalloped pattern that we're looking for. All right, so that's where we left off last time. We got one last intermittent schedule pattern to look at, and that is the variable interval schedule. So the variable interval schedule is another interval schedule. So again, it's the first response after a period of time has elapsed that is going to be reinforced. During that period of time, nothing is being reinforced. The organism can do whatever they want. But this time, that interval is variable. So on average, it's going to be a certain length. But the organism has no way of learning what that length is, right? They just know that on average, it might be 10 seconds, it might be 20 seconds. But they importantly don't know if the interval they're currently in will last 40 seconds, or will it last 2 seconds, or has it already expired? They have no idea. So what this variable interval schedule of reinforcement leads to is this type of behavior here. So we can tell that this is a variable interval schedule of reinforcement because the interval between different reinforcements, so we got one reinforcement here, we got one reinforcement there, there's the time interval between the two. That interval changes as you go through this intermittent schedule of reinforcement. So sometimes it's a medium-sized interval, sometimes it's a really small time interval. Sometimes they have to wait a long time before they get reinforced for that first response. And it leads to this characteristic type of responding when somebody's on a variable interval schedule of reinforcement. Now, I will mention that the variable interval schedule of reinforcement, when you're looking at the pattern of responses, is very difficult to distinguish from the variable ratio schedule of reinforcement. So in the real world, it's kind of hard to distinguish between which schedule they're on based on their pattern of behavior. In the lab, we know exactly which schedule they're on because we're the ones that set up that schedule. But just bear that in mind. This pattern of responding almost looks identical to what the variable ratio pattern of responding looks like. The major difference is that this one does not lead to a rapid rate of response. It leads to a moderate rate of responding. So the organism is not responding about as quickly as they can. It's a more moderate rate of responding. Again, in the real world, the challenge is what's a moderate rate of responding compared to a high rate of responding. But again, in the lab, it's more clear cut. So we get this moderate rate of responding, and also we have no post-reinforcement pause. We have none of these flat lines. As soon as the organism gets reinforced, it just continues doing the behavior. As soon as Sniffy gets food for pressing the bar, Sniffy will just keep pressing the bar. Not super fast. Sniffy won't be sitting there like somebody on a slot machine just pressing that button as fast as they can go. But Sniffy will not take a break and will just kind of be like, all right, maybe this time, no. How about this time? No. This time? No. This time. So it's that moderate rate of responding, and also no post-reinforcement pause, because again, that interval might have elapsed very quickly, right? That interval might have been the short interval this time. So those responses are basically kind of, you can think of them as almost feeling out. You know, maybe the interval is over at this point. So this moderate rate of responding and no post-reinforcement pause is your typical pattern of behavior for a variable interval schedule. And we saw this schedule very prominently in the early days of social media when Facebook was only available on PCs, and more importantly, when you didn't have that push notification that we now have on our cell phones. So back in the day when you actually had to log in on your computer on the Facebook website, and it would not give you updates on when people commented on your post, when people liked your post, when somebody else posted something, you know, when a friend of yours put up a picture. They wouldn't actually, back in the days when they wouldn't give you those notifications, basically you were on a variable interval schedule of reinforcement. So you wouldn't know if you checked your Facebook feed at 9 a.m. in the morning. You don't know if somebody's going to like your post, or if a friend of yours is going to post, make a Facebook post. You didn't know if it was going to happen at 9:01. You didn't know if it was going to happen at 9:10. You didn't know if you were going to have to wait till 10:30 before somebody did something that you wanted to see. So the interval after which you'd be reinforced for logging back into Facebook and checking your feed, that interval was very variable, right? Because again, somebody could post something 5 seconds after you just checked, or somebody could like your post an hour after you put it up. So that interval that needed to expire before you got reinforced with either new content or feedback, that was variable. And what that led to is it led to the typical pattern of people had when they checked their Facebook feed, which was they wouldn't do it all the time. So they weren't like slot machine players who would just be sitting there going, log in, maybe now, nothing, refresh, nothing, refresh, nothing, refresh, nothing, refresh, nothing, refresh, nothing, refresh. Ooh, somebody liked my post. Refresh, nothing, refresh, right? Nobody did that. Well, people who are addicted to social media did that. But on average, the typical person did not do that. What did they do? They would log in at 9 a.m. when they were having their breakfast, and they would be like, oh, did anybody, oh, okay, yeah, somebody liked my post, oh, cool, thumbs up, whatever, poke, if you guys remember that. And then they would shut it down, right? And they would go about their daily business. And maybe in 3 hours at 12 o'clock, they would come back and they'd be like, let me check my Facebook feed. Oh, okay, nothing new. All right, whatever, shut it down. And then they would come back later in the evening. Let me check it again. Oh, look at that. Baby pictures from my, from my sister. So whatever it was on a variable interval schedule of reinforcement. And that's why people checked it at a very moderate pace. That's why you didn't get that frantic kind of slot machine behavior. Because again, that was a schedule of reinforcement that we were on, that variable interval schedule. And that schedule by itself, in and of itself, leads to that behavior, that moderate rate of responding. And also there was no post-reinforcement pause. So when you logged in at 12 and you saw it and you go, oh, somebody liked my, my pictures of the Grand Canyon. You didn't say to yourself, well, I guess I'm done with Facebook for the next 3 days. You were like, no, I'll come back at 5, right? I'll come back with this moderate rate of responding because again, you have that lack of the post-reinforcement pause. All right. And then this is going to be also a schedule that you're going to put Sniffy on. So just once again, avoid that ratio strain. Once again, make sure that you don't take Sniffy from, another schedule straight up to a variable interval schedule of 50, because again, you might put him through extinction, in which case you'll have to train him to bar press again, or you'll get ratio strained and you won't get that characteristic pattern. So for full points, when you bring him up to a variable interval ratio of 50, I need to see that kind of straight line, low slope, moderate rate of responding with no post-reinforcement pause. And once again, just as a warning, when you're doing these assignments, don't let Sniffy's cumulative recorder go past 10. Because once he goes past 10, Sniffy will retire and basically fall asleep in the corner. So if that happens, just restart it. You can always go back to your exercise number 5 to start off with a fresh Sniffy that knows how to bar press. But just be aware, if it goes to 10, Sniffy will go to sleep on you. All right, any questions about any of the 4 basic schedules of reinforcement and the pattern of behaviors that they produce? All right, so the last thing we'll take a look at is non-contingent schedules. Excuse me. And what a non-contingent schedule is, it's where reinforcement is given, but it's not contingent upon any operant response. So it's basically like a freebie. It's basically a gimme, right? It's where you reinforce somebody, but there's no response that they need to make in order to receive that reinforcement. So one of the big non-contingent schedules that we observe in our society is gifts for children on Christmas. So there used to be a time, I've heard about it in legend and myths and whispered on the wind, when if a child was good, they would get presents for Christmas. And if a child was bad, they would get coal in their stocking. Right? I don't know if you guys have ever heard about this legend. So that's a contingent schedule of reinforcement, right? If you did good behavior, you would be reinforced for that good behavior with presents. If you did bad behavior, you would be punished, positively punished for that behavior with coal. You would be getting coal in your stocking. These days, I don't know what kind of horrible sociopath a child would have to be in order to not get a Christmas present on Christmas. It is almost unheard of, regardless of what a child's behavior is, that they would not get presents on Christmas and would rather get, coal or some sort of punishment on Christmas. So Christmas has become a non-contingent schedule. Basically, children can act any way that they want to the entire year, and their parents might threaten them and say, oh, you're being mean to your sister. I got Santa Claus on speed dial here. And, after a while, the children are like, give them a call, whatever. I'm still getting something, right? Because they just know they're on a non-contingent reinforcement schedule. So non-contingent schedules have been studied, and what they've been found is that they generally lead to low rates of response and poor performance. So it is a very bad idea to have non-contingent schedules in place in a system where you're looking for high rates of response or you're looking for excellent performance. To reward people for no behavior typically does not lead to high performance or those high rates of behavior. And to just kind of show you how ingrained this is into our mental makeup, there was this one really interesting study that was done with pitchers in the major leagues. So these are people who are so obsessed with baseball that they have literally dedicated their life to it. They have practiced hours a day for years. They've given up half their life to it. They've said no to going to the prom so they could practice with their, pitching coach. They've said no to, parties and outings because they had to study tape on their players, for the next game. They have sacrificed a lot to get to where they are. These are the professional pitchers. And what this study has found is that if you look at the rate of performance, right, mean innings pitched, so how many innings do these pitchers pitch in a, I guess that would be in a year. What was the mean number of innings that they pitched? Well, on their rookie year, when they were signed to a contingent contract, when they were signed to a contract that would either have bonuses or would have a certain requirements, certain riders, certain performance requirements, they pitched a certain number of innings. The next year, still on that contingent contract, they would pitch even more. The third year, they would pitch even more. So as they were getting reinforced for their pitching, they were pitching at higher rates. They had a higher rate of response. After the third year is when their initial rookie contract expired. The good pitchers now can sign guaranteed contracts where their money and their salary is guaranteed regardless of whether they ever strike out somebody before. And again, these are people who are obsessed with baseball. These are people who have dedicated half their life to this. These are not casual players of the game. And yet, even after they signed that guaranteed contract, when they were put on a non-contingent scheduled reinforcement, their rate of response declined. And they pitched fewer and fewer innings as they moved through their fourth, fifth, and sixth year. So that is evidence that these non-contingent schedules of reinforcement do lead to poor performance, and they do lead to these low rates of behavior. Any questions on non-contingent schedules of reinforcement? All right. So what we're going to do now to kind of wrap this up, and hopefully this isn't too much to ask after being off for a week. So there was this decline noticed in years 4, 5, and 6. Can anybody come up, and the paper argued that this was due to these pitchers being placed on a non-contingent schedule of reinforcement. They got that guaranteed contract. Can anybody else kind of flex their critical thinking skills and come up with another reason why pitching innings pitched might have gone down in years 4, 5, and 6?
Saving veteran pitchers for the playoffs and more important games.
So number one, they might be saving their veteran pitchers, their ace pitchers, for more important games. So they might rest them more. They might know that they want them healthy over the long haul. So instead of pitching a full game, they'll say, we'll take you out in the 6th or 7th inning. So that's one possibility. Anything else? Any other ones? Yep.
More likely to be injured in the later years.
They're getting older and it's more likely to get injured. Right? So maybe some of these numbers are going down because just as you get older, your shoulder wears out, your elbow wears out, you're more likely to get injured. Any other possibilities?
When other teams start seeing you over and over and over again, they start understanding you as a pitcher, so they're going to put in new pitchers and new teams.
So they understand you as a pitcher, so your performance might go down just because they figured you out? Yeah, so maybe teams have watched 3 years worth of tape, and now they're like, oh, this pitcher has a tell, or this pitcher, you know, their curveball does this, so we practice against them, and now they're just less effective. They've been figured out. So all of these are possibilities of why this behavior has gone down. So how could we possibly test whether or not this drop is due to that guaranteed contract or whether or not the drop is due to these other factors? What technique did we see previously that could help us with this? Does anybody remember the single subject designs and one of the techniques for the single subject design? Anybody remember the person who was getting treated for smoking and they were tearing up the $5 bills and they had a week of success where their smoking went down? What did the therapist do in the second week? What was that? They took away the punishment. In the second week, to make sure that it was the treatment that was effective, to make sure that it was the treatment that caused the decrease in smoking, what the therapist would do, they would say, all right, let's remove the treatment. You're no longer being punished for smoking. Don't be ripping up any $5 bills anymore. For the next week, smoke as much as you want. And if the smoking went back to those baseline levels, that indicates that it was the treatment that was effective and not some other thing that happened. It wasn't that they were in the hospital for a week so they couldn't sneak any cigarettes. It wasn't that their mother was visiting and she doesn't know that they smoke. It wasn't that they found, you know, a new significant other that doesn't like cigarette smokers. It wasn't that their local cigarette shop burnt down and now they have to drive a lot further to get cigarettes. It wasn't anything else that could have happened. It was actually the treatment. So what could we do in this case?
Either like offer a raise or take away the contract guarantee.
Exactly. So that guaranteed contract is going to expire at some point. And if they're placed now on a non-guaranteed contract, so if you remove that guaranteed contract and put them back on a contingent contract, if this is due to the non-contingent schedule of reinforcement that they were put on, then once they're put on this new contingent contract, we should see their innings pitched go back up. On the other hand, if this is due to them getting older, or them getting injured, or them being saved for important games, or people watching their film and figuring them out, if that's what it's due for, if that's what causes decline, then the decline should remain even when they lose their guaranteed contracts. So that's kind of final thing that is necessary in this particular experiment to figure out, was it really the non-contingent reinforcement, or was it some other possible cause? All right, so that was the contingent and non-contingent and schedules and theories of reinforcement. What we're going to do now is we're going to continue on with our look at chapter 7. And specifically, we're going to try to use schedules of reinforcement and theories of reinforcement to answer a few peculiar questions. So we're going to introduce this guy right over here. That is Felix Baumgartner, and he's kind of infamous. A few years back, he did something that nobody has ever done before. Does anybody remember what Felix Baumgartner did? No? All right, so let's take a look at what he did. Felix Baumgartner basically was the first person ever to skydive from outer space. All the time. All right, hold on a sec. Here's my watch on YouTube. All right, we're doing it old school.
My name is Ashley Julian. I am a professional rock climber. I love being on the road.
She's an incredibly loud rock climber. All right. There he is. So, for some reason, this man decided that it would be a good idea and that he really wanted to go up into space in his little pod and literally jump out of that and skydive from outer space. I like to think they muted his mic at this point and he was just like, ah! No, come on. Are you kidding me? And I love that it happened when I looked away. I was just, all right, well, okay, so I'll show you some of the highlights. Sorry about that. The link is in the presentation so you can check it out. All right, so Felix Baumgartner, for some reason, wanted to go up in outer space to skydive, jumped out of that pod, fell to the earth, fell so fast, he actually broke the sound barrier, which means that he was going so fast that if he was screaming, he wouldn't be able to hear himself scream because he was moving so fast that his scream would already be behind him by the time he could hear his own voice. However, it was successful and he loved it. He just had the best time ever. So we're going to take a look at his case and try to explain why anybody would want to do this. And also why some people, how you can use skydiving to reinforce some people. But for other people, I saw some faces when I was talking about him skydiving from outer space. And I saw some faces where it was like skydiving would not be reinforcing for these people. So why is skydiving reinforcing for Felix, but not reinforcing for others? We're going to take a look at how you can discover what is reinforcing and what is not before you actually try it out. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at a very interesting song by Reparata and the Delrons, I believe. And it's a song that expresses an idea in our culture basically about the effectiveness of playing hard to get. So let's hope this doesn't crash.
If you've never heard a U-Pack, that's okay.
All right. Hopefully this one will work. All right, let me reverse that. All right, so insane, right? So just imagine this situation. Imagine a friend of yours comes up to you and says, oh, just want to let you know, me and Tommy were dating. And you're like, really? I thought you weren't interested in Tommy. And it's like, well, I wasn't interested in him before. And it's like, well, he used to send you pretty flowers. Yeah, I know, I just wasn't interested. And, he used to call you on the phone. Yeah, I wasn't interested. And the few times he did go out, he never kept you waiting. Yeah, I just wasn't interested. He whispered tender, sweet things in your ear. Yeah, didn't really, not interested. It's like, oh, well, what changed? Oh, well, now he's extremely unkind. Like, he just treats me horribly. And he keeps me waiting, and he hardly ever calls me, and, never sends me flowers anymore. I just can't get him off my mind. I don't know what happened. You would look at that person, and you would say, you're insane. You need help, right? But we're going to see that psychologically there are mechanisms in your mind that play directly into this. There is a psychological reason why hard to get actually is an effective strategy for increasing these behaviors, in this case, increasing the desire to hang out with a particular person. So, this is a nice example where the end behavior, actually these are two nice examples, where the end behavior might seem absolutely bananas, when you examine it at the end point. So when you take a look at, the protagonist of this song, when Tommy was wonderful, no interest whatsoever. Now that Tommy treats her like garbage, she can't get enough of Tommy. That's insane. Felix Baumgartner, skydiving from outer space. That's insane, right? But as we're going to see, it's nothing wrong with these individuals that is causing them to do this behavior. It's because of their history of reinforcement that is providing these kind of weird behaviors. So very normal, regular, common mechanisms of learning can come together to produce oftentimes bizarre behavior. All right, so what are we going to do to analyze these two behaviors? We're going to start off with theories of reinforcement, specifically, very importantly, the response deprivation hypothesis, and that's going to help us understand why, for some people, skydiving could be a massive reinforcement. For other people, skydiving would actually be a punishment. So what is it that changes whether something is a reinforcer or not? And then we're also going to introduce the idea of extinction, the side effects of extinction. We'll start off with those and then check out differential reinforcement of other behavior. And we're doing this to kind of get us ready for the class where we're going to watch a movie, a documentary on the treatment of an individual called Harry. And Harry, as you're going to see, is a self-injurious individual. So he's an individual that has a behavior that they want to decrease where he injures himself. So this is an image of him. It's through a one-way mirror. It's an image of him where he's biting himself. This is an image of him where he is smashing his own head with his fist. And he has done this so much. This is an image of him kneeing his face into his own knee. And he's done it so much that he's permanently disfigured his nose. I mean, this is not, the kind of stuff that if you want to psych yourself up, you're really tired and you're like, come on, let's go. And you just kind of slap yourself. This is like far and away, this is harmful to this individual. So because of that, he had to be restrained throughout his life so that he couldn't harm himself all the way up to a straitjacket. And we're going to see when we take a look at this treatment, this documentary, that one of the key things that the therapists found out, one of the key discoveries that these doctors made was that these restraints were actually reinforcing for Harry. The restraint was actually a reinforcement for Harry. So once again, we have this example of something that for most of us would not be a reinforcement whatsoever, right? For most of us, if somebody said, hey, can you help me move? And, if you do, I'll tie you up in a straitjacket. How's that sound? You'd be like, no, I'll help you move, but I don't need that, that contingency. But for Harry, this was reinforcement. So we're going to take a look at all these mysteries and see what the theories of reinforcement can tell us about why different individuals have these kind of extreme behaviors and how it all makes sense just looking at everyday learning processes that are working in all of us. All right, so for this, we got to go back to theories of reinforcement, back to our Skinner box. And we're going to start off with the question of what a reinforcer is. So early in behaviorist theory, early in operational conditioning, the definition of a reinforcer, and we looked at this, was something that increased the probability of a behavior. So if you were to ask, I want to increase the probability of a behavior. I have a good behavior, in a subject that I'm working with, right? And I want to increase that behavior. What can I do to increase that behavior? And a psychologist would say, follow the behavior with a reinforcer. Give them a reinforcer for that, after that behavior. And then the person might say, well, that's great. What's a reinforcer? And the psychologist would say, well, a reinforcer is anything that increases the probability of a behavior. And the first person would say, well, what increases the probability of a behavior? And the psychologist would say, well, a reinforcer. And the person would say, well, what's a reinforcer? And the psychologist would say, anything that increases the probability of a behavior. And the person would go, what increases the probability of a behavior? And you can see that you're just going round and round and round and round and round. And the problem with this is that it's a circular definition. And with a circular definition, you have no power to actually identify a reinforcer. So if somebody came up to you and said, you know what, my child, I want to reinforce them for doing their chores. Do you think this slice of pie is going to be a reinforcer for my child? The psychologist would look at that and say, I don't know. Give it to your child and see if it increases their behavior. If it does, it's a reinforcer. If it doesn't, it's a punisher. If they came to you and they said, I want to increase, I want to reinforce my child for doing their chores, do you think half an hour of TV will be a reinforcer? Again, the psychologist would say, I don't know. Give it to the child, see if it increases their behavior. If it does, it's a reinforcer. If it doesn't, it's not a reinforcer. So there was a real problem because nobody could predict if something was going to be reinforcing or not. Nobody could say before the reinforcement occurred whether something would work to reinforce individuals or whether it wouldn't be a reinforcer because of this circular definition. So what some psychologists did was they tried to answer this question. How can we figure out if something's going to be a reinforcer before it's actually tested, before we actually give it to an individual and see if it increases their behavior? And what they did is they took a look at the definition and they said, all right, a reinforcer is any event, anything that can occur that increases the probability of a behavior. And events are basically behaviors. So if you give somebody food, they're going to engage in the behavior of eating. If you give somebody access to TV, they're going to engage in the behavior of watching TV. So these reinforcers can be thought of in terms of behaviors. They can be thought of in terms of things that the organism can now do. So based on that idea that reinforcers are basically behaviors, they came up with what is known as the response deprivation hypothesis. And the response deprivation hypothesis says that a particular behavior, right, a specific type of behavior will be a reinforcer when two conditions are satisfied. So if you satisfy those two conditions, you will be sure that this behavior can be used as a reinforcer. So these two conditions are, number one, access to that behavior has to be restricted. So the organism cannot have as much of that behavior as they want. Some sort of access to the behavior has to be restricted. And then the second criteria is that restriction leads to the frequency of that behavior falling below its preferred level of occurrence. And if you satisfy those two criteria, you know that that behavior can be used as a reinforcer. So once again, if you want to know whether something is a reinforcer or not, you need to know, number one, you need to restrict access to that behavior, and you need that behavior to fall below the preferred level of that behavior's occurrence. And if those two are satisfied, you know you're dealing with a reinforcer before you ever offer it to the individual. So let's take a look at a few examples of this. Let's say that you prefer 3,000 calories of food per day. Let's say that you track your dietary intake. You're not on a calorie restricted diet or anything like that, and you average about 3,000 calories of food per day. That is your preferred level. Anything more than that, you're going to be too full. Anything below that, you're going to be too hungry. 3,000 is right where you like to be. If at that point you only get 2,000 calories of food, you have a preferred level. It's 3,000. Access has been restricted. Now you only get 2,000. That restriction of access has dropped your food below that preferred level. If that's the case, then food will be a reinforcer. So this is why typically in animal studies, animals are allowed to eat as much food as they want until their weight stabilizes. And that's known as their ad lib weight, right? The weight that they have when they have access to all the food that they want. And then what they do is the researchers will reduce that weight. So they'll reduce the calories until their weight is approximately 80% of what the ad lib weight was. That's still heavier than they are in the wild, but it restricts their access to food. That's why in just about every experimental situation, food can be used as a reinforcer, because the animals want this much food, they've been given this much food, so it's been restricted, it's fallen below the preferred level, and you know before the first bar is pressed that food is going to be a reinforcer. But that does not mean that food will always be a reinforcer, right? So, again, if your food intake is below a particular level that you want, food will be acting as a reinforcer. So imagine on a typical day, right? You have a child who loves dessert, and you tell them, look, I have all these dishes that I need to do. If you help me with the dishes, I'll give you another helping of dessert. I know you just finished dessert, but if you help me with the dishes, I'll give you another slice of pie. How does that sound? And if that child wants 2 slices of pie, but they only got 1 slice of pie, that slice of pie, that extra one that you're now offering, will be a reinforcer. And the probability of them helping you with the dishes will go up. So in that case, they want this much pie, they got this much pie, pie will be a reinforcer. However, let's say that you prefer to get 3,000 calories of food, but it's Thanksgiving Day, and you have just gorged yourself on 4,000 calories of food. In this case, you have a preferred level of food, but the food has not been restricted. And most importantly, it has not been restricted to a level below your preferred level. You want 3,000, you got 4,000 calories of food. Now, food will not be a reinforcer. So after Thanksgiving dinner, when that child is filled with turkey and stuffing and pie because their eating has not been restricted, and you go to them and you say, you know what, I got all these dishes to do, help me with the dishes, I'll give you another slice of pie, that child might be like, no thank you, I can't even move, do not show me pie right now, pie is not a reinforcer. They wouldn't say that, but basically that's what they're saying. Pie is not a reinforcer right now. So again, depending upon where you are in your preferred level, food will sometimes not be a reinforcer if you're above your preferred level. Food will be a reinforcer if you're below your preferred level. And that's how you can tell whether or not food will be a reinforcer before you try it out. You'll know that it's reinforcing before you even try it out. All right, let's take a look at another example. All right, let's say that you're a basketball player and you prefer playing basketball for 1 hour a day, right? So if you had it your way, you would go to the park, play some pickup basketball. After about an hour, you're like, that's enough for me. That's my preferred level. I'm going home. And that's what you like to do every single day. If you only then get playing basketball for 30 minutes, right? So let's say that you're a high school kid and you like to play for 1 hour a day, but for some reason, because you joined band after school, now you only get to play for half an hour a day. In that case, you want to play for an hour, it's now been restricted, you only get to play for half an hour, playing basketball will be a reinforcer. So if that parent goes to that child and says, hey, you know what, you used to play basketball for an hour a day, now you're only getting half an hour, I tell you what, you do, these chores, you take out the trash right now, and I'll let you play basketball for another half an hour before you go to bed. That half an hour is going to be reinforcing because, again, the preferred level is 1 hour, the current level is 30 minutes, so there's a deficit, so they'll want to play.
Is there a certain ratio that it has to be under?
No.
Okay.
No, the theory is just as long as it's under. Yep. All right, so again, if it's below your preferred level, in this case, basketball will be a reinforcer. However, let's say that it's a different situation. And instead of joining the band, this child joined the basketball team. And now this child is doing two-a-days, right? They got early morning practice, they got after school practice. They are playing basketball for 2 hours per day. Now, even though this child plays basketball for 1 hour a day, that's their preferred level, they are now getting more basketball than they want. They are now at 2 hours per day. So now basketball will not be a reinforcer. And if that parent says, hey, you know what, take out the trash and I'll give you another half hour for you to go play basketball, the child will be like, you know what, no thank you, not reinforcing, I've had enough. I'm actually above my level of basketball right now. So again, you can see this indication where there's a preferred level for different behaviors. And at that preferred level, if it's restricted and it falls below that preferred level, that behavior will act as a reinforcer. If it's not below that preferred level, then that behavior will not act as a reinforcer. And this explains also why some behaviors are seen by many people as reinforcers and they're seen by many other people as punishers. So for example, skydiving. Again, when I was talking about Felix Baumgartner jumping out of a pod in outer space, I saw a lot of people make cringy faces where they were like, no chance in hell, I would never ever do that. I'm not even jumping out of a regular, altitude plane. So in that case, one of the interesting things about Felix Baumgartner was that his jump from outer space took a ton of work on his end. So he had to find sponsorships. He had to find, it's not cheap to jump from outer space, right? He had to find technical people, funding, basically had to do a lot of groundwork in order to make this dream occur. He eventually ended up, and this is kind of weird, NASA did not want to help him do this. He ended up going with Red Bull, right? That's why he got Red Bull splattered on the side of him. Red Bull was the one that funded his jump. But it was a ton of work, right, to do all that behavior. So why would he do it in order to jump from outer space? Well, for some reason, and we're going to see why in the coming lectures, for some reason, Baumgartner preferred skydiving from outer space. That was his preferred level of behavior. And up until that point, he only got skydiving from a plane. And that means that he literally wanted to be up here in the upper atmosphere. That was his preferred level. He was down here in the lower atmosphere, jumping out of planes. It was below his preferred level. So skydiving from space, when somebody came to him and said, hey, we'll give you this money to skydive from space, are you interested? And he was like, yeah. That's because for him, skydiving from space was a reinforcer because he wanted to skydive from space, but he only got skydiving from a plane. So it was restricted below his preferred level. So again, in the coming weeks, we'll see why he ever wanted to skydive from outer space, especially because mysteriously he had never skydived from outer space before. So it's one thing to explain a behavior that you've done and you've been reinforced for in terms of you wanting to do that behavior again. It's another thing to explain the mystery of why sometimes we're compelled to do things that we have never done before, right? So that first time you go on a roller coaster, you don't know what it's like on a roller coaster. It could be the worst thing ever. But for some reason, people are like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited, my first roller coaster. This is going to be great. I just have that feeling. So we're going to see later on why he had that feeling that skydiving from space would have been awesome. But for right now, it was a reinforcer because that's where he wanted to be, but he was only skydiving from a plane. On the other hand, let's say that you prefer, as many people in this class I would imagine would prefer, not skydiving from a plane. Let's say that that's your preferred level. If somebody said, what altitude do you want to skydive from? And you're like, how about 0 feet, like the altitude we're at right now? We'll just strap a parachute, I'll open it, we'll be done, right? Let's say that that's your preferred level. And you get skydiving from a plane. Skydiving from a plane will not be a reinforcer. So if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, you got your exams coming up. You get an A on your exam, we'll take you skydiving. You would say, not reinforcing. It's not going to do anything for my exam scores because I actually don't want to go skydiving because you want to be on the ground. They're trying to lift you up into the air. Your preferred level is 0 feet. They want to take you up. I don't know how many feet you skydive from, but however many it is, it's more than 0. Skydiving will not be a reinforcer. All right, any questions so far on the response deprivation hypothesis? Okay, so let's take a look at another kind of bizarro behavior that we took a look at, which was the Reparata and the Delrons song Tommy. So again, we have this weird situation that is not uncommon in our society, where a particular individual is not interested in somebody when they're behaving nicely to them. So again, we have Tommy would always send me pretty flowers. Tommy would call me on the phone and talk for hours, but no interest, right? Not interested in Tommy at this point. So again, it sounds insane, right? If somebody says, oh, Tommy used to treat me really nice, I had no interest in him, but now everything's changed. And they're like, oh, really? Yeah, now he treats me like garbage and I just can't get enough. Insane. Not really. And we'll see why. It has to do with the response deprivation hypothesis. So what, I don't want to be too callous about this, but sometimes if you want to understand behavior, as a psychologist, you want to understand all behavior. And sometimes it gets a little bit unpoetic when you start breaking down very important emotions like love. So a lot of the research on love, on dating, on intimacy, when you read it, it sounds so cold and calculating because you're like, well, this stimulus over here led to this behavior over here, which was reinforced with this stimulus over here. And you're like, you're talking about taking somebody out to a carnival in a movie. Like, well, this sounds, very cold. But we're psychologists. We're trying to understand all behavior, and love is one of those. So in this situation, in any dating situation, you can think of dating, you can frame it in terms of the target behavior that you are looking to increase is spending time together. If you're dating somebody, one of your goals is to increase the behavior of them spending time with you, right? So if you're only starting out on dating, maybe 1 hour, a week, as you progress, maybe you go out 2 nights a week, then you go out 3 nights a week. So, you're spending 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours together. You're looking to spend that, increase that time that you spend together until you get to marriage, and then you're spending 24 hours together, and you've maxed out. So that's what you're looking to do. You're looking to increase that behavior of that person spending time with you. And you do it by reinforcement. And that's why it sounds very horrible. But again, you do it by reinforcement. You basically say, hey, you spend time with me, I'll take you to this nice restaurant. We can have some nice food. If you spend time with me, we'll go watch this fun movie. If you spend time with me, we'll go to this, concert, and we'll have a good time, right? That's why people want to have good times on dates, right? Nobody ever says, hey, if you spend time with me, you can watch me do my taxes. Nobody ever does that because you're looking to reinforce that behavior of spending time with you by giving them reinforcers. What is a reinforcer, however? So in this case, I'll put it in terms of Reparata, she's the lead singer. If she prefers some flowers from Tommy, that's her preferred level. And she goes out on a date and she always gets flowers from Tommy, right? So she wants this many flowers with Tommy. She is getting this many flowers with Tommy. Flowers are not acting as a reinforcer. So after a date, when Tommy sends her flowers, she's getting those flowers and she's saying, you know what? I like flowers, but not this much. This is way too much. So I'm not being reinforced for spending time with Tommy. Basically, her desire to spend more time with him is not changing. It's not being reinforced. It's not increasing. So in that case, some flowers from Tommy is what she wants. Always flowers from Tommy is what she gets. Flowers from Tommy are not a reinforcer. She has no desire to increase the time that she spends with Tommy. Tommy would call me on the phone and talk for hours. All right. Once again, we have this situation where Tommy is trying to reinforce her. Hey, I went out on a date with her on Friday night. I know what I'll do. I'll call her up on Saturday and I'll talk with her for hours and I'll follow up on the date. She'll love that. No, she won't. Because if your preferred level is talking on the phone for minutes with Tommy, but you're getting talking on the phone for hours with Tommy, once again, talking on the phone with Tommy is not going to be reinforcement, right? So she doesn't want to be ignored, right? She doesn't want 0 minutes on the phone with Tommy. She wants some minutes on the phone with Tommy. She wants to be right here. She's getting this. So after she spends time with Tommy and he gives her that phone call, it's too much. It's not a reinforcer. It's not going to increase her desire to spend time with him in the future. However, later on, something happens and Tommy changes. His behavior changes. And now he's not so sweet and he's far from polite, hardly ever calls me and comes to pick me up late every night. So this is now the new situation. And now all of a sudden, her desire to spend time with Tommy is increased. Now she can't seem to get him off her mind. Now she wants to be with him more often. So why did that occur? Well, again, her preferences have not changed. She would like to talk on the phone for minutes with Tommy, right? Her preferred level of talking with Tommy, let's say, has not changed. But now, instead of getting hours, she hardly ever gets to talk to Tommy. So now, this is her level. She wants minutes. Now she's getting hardly ever. Her preferred level has been restricted, and it has fallen below this preferred level. What that means is that talking on the phone with Tommy is now a reinforcer. So when they spend some time together, and Tommy gives her that phone call after their Friday night date, now that phone call acts as a reinforcer. So she spent time with him, got the phone call. Now that phone call is a reinforcer. Probability of spending time with him increases. Desire to spend time with him increases. You know, although he treats me so unkind now, can't seem to get him off my mind now. He's not the same boy I knew back when, but I love Tommy more than I did then. And the reason is because all of the things Tommy did before that he thought was reinforcing her spending time with him, all of those were way above her preferred level. But as soon as they drop down below her preferred level, they then can be used as reinforcers. So now the once in a while that she gets flowers, that'll reinforce spending time with Tommy, and it'll increase her desire for that. Now the once in a while that she gets a phone call will reinforce her spending time with Tommy. It'll increase her desire to spend time with him. They mentioned where is it? He's so unkind now. He used to give her kindness, right? There's a thing is too much kindness. They can say killing, they have the phrase, killing people with kindness. People want a certain level of kindness. They don't want kindness up here. That's too much. It's not reinforcing. But if you want a certain level of kindness and all of a sudden it falls below that, kindness can be used as a reinforcer. So that one nice word that you say, that one time when you take a look at the person that you're dating and you go, oh, you kind of look nice today. All of a sudden, if they want kindness up here and you're only giving them kindness down here, that kindness acts as a reinforcer. And that's one of the reasons why it's so reinforcing for people in abusive relationships when that one little act of kindness occurs, right? When they always say like, oh, basically what she's mentioning, but in a more extreme version, like, they beat me, they're very abusive, they're emotionally abusive. It's like, well, why don't you leave them? Well, last week they did the sweetest thing. It's like, really, what did they do? They told me they were going to pick me up from work and they showed up on time. It was so sweet, I couldn't imagine. It's like, really, that's it? Like, that's your, yeah, it is, because they want kindness up here, they're getting kindness down here. So the regular things of picking them up on time is reinforcing for staying in that relationship. And it was a very interesting thing that I read once where somebody was talking about people coming out of abusive relationships and how important it is to remind them what is common kind of courtesy. Because oftentimes they're so grateful when somebody's showing them the least little bit of kindness, right? You kind of help them out of an abusive relationship and they're like, oh my gosh, you're the nicest person in the world. I can't believe how amazing you are. And it's nice for your ego, right? You're kind of like, hey, I like to be the nicest person in the world. I like to be amazing. But it's important to remind them that this is average. Like this is kind of the typical level that you should be used to kind of get them out of that mindset. Because again, they've been in this restricted level access to reinforcers. So every little thing now acts as a reinforcer. So again, bizarre behavior that on the outside, if you take a look at an abusive relationship from the outside, it boggles the mind. It's so illogical. But as soon as you start to understand the psychological processes underneath, it's the same things that's operating in any of us. All right, and then we'll just introduce the idea of extinction today in preparation for our look at Harry. Actually, before we get to that, any questions about the response to provision hypothesis before we put a pin in that? All right. All right, so Harry, we're going to take a look at a case study of an individual who was treated for self-abusive behavior, of an individual who was restrained, and their restraints were actually reinforcing for them. Restraining them actually increased the probability of their self-abuse. So we're going to take a look at how the basic procedure for treating Harry and how it was set up. And for that, we need to understand extinction. So you might have already done this for Sniffy when you taught him to bar press and then you went through extinction. So let's talk a little bit about the intricacies of extinction. So extinction is when you have a previously reinforced response and then it becomes non-reinforced. So it has to have been previously reinforced. The organism was previously rewarded or reinforced for doing this behavior. And then in the extinction procedure, you take that reinforcement away, right? You just remove it. They no longer get reinforced for that response. And what happens is that this results in a decrease in either the strength and or the probability of the response. So if Sniffy was being reinforced for bar pressing, so you press the bar, get reinforcement, press the bar, get food, you got a behavior that was being reinforced. If you put Sniffy through extinction, what that means is that you remove that reinforcement. So Sniffy no longer receives food for pressing a lever, and what will happen is that the rate and the strength and the probability of that lever press will gradually go down, 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 down until Sniffy decides, I'm no longer pressing this lever. So what we're going to see is that part of the therapist and the doctor's challenge when they were looking at Harry was first to realize that his self-injurious behavior was being reinforced. So what they did is, remember the 4 patterns of behavior that we saw for different intermittent schedules of reinforcement? They recognized one of those 4 patterns of behavior in the rate of self-injurious behavior that Harry was doing. And they, from that, deduced that Harry was being reinforced for his behavior, for his self-injurious behavior, and it was on a particular schedule. So I'll leave that for when we watch the video. But importantly, he was being reinforced. So when Harry, as horrible as this sounds, it came from well-meaning individuals who were not educated in psychology. When Harry would injure himself, he would get reinforced for that injury, and that just made his injuries worse and worse and worse. So what Dr. Fox, as a doctor that treated him, what Dr. Fox did, one of the first things that he did was he said, all right, we've identified this contingency that Harry is operating under. He's getting reinforced for his self-injury. What we're going to do is we're going to remove that reinforcer. So one of the first things that they do is they said, we're no longer going to reinforce Harry for his self-injurious behavior. And that was the first piece of getting Harry's self-injury to go lower and lower and lower. So that's the kind of basics of extinction. What we're going to do next time is we're going to go into a little bit more detail on this, and we're going to take a look at some of the extinction side effects. But one of the ones that the last one we'll cover here before we end for the day, is one of the reasons why anybody who wants to help people, it's not enough that you're intuitive, it's not enough that you have good intentions, it's not enough that you're well-meaning. You need an education, typically in psychology, in order to do that. So therapists are therapists for a reason. You go to years of school for a reason. And one of them is because your own mind and behavior will play tricks on you that go exactly opposite of what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And one of those is the extinction side effect known as the extinction burst. And what an extinction burst is, this is a temporary increase in the frequency and intensity of responding when extinction is implemented. So imagine this from a layperson's point of view, right? Imagine that they have a child that throws tantrums in the supermarket. And every single time they throw a tantrum, they give this child a chocolate bar. The child's like, and they're like, okay, fine, here's a chocolate bar, and the child goes quiet. We all know at this point that that is positive reinforcement for that tantrum. Child throws a tantrum, gets a chocolate bar, that's positive. Tantrums get worse as the visits go on, that's reinforcement, positive reinforcement. If that parent all of a sudden says to themselves, you know what, that's it, I'm drawing the line in the sand. No more chocolate bars, for the tantrums. I see what's going on. No more chocolate bars for tantrums. And I heard about this thing called extinction, so that the tantrums will gradually get lower and lower and lower until my child's not throwing a tantrum anymore. Why would they? They're not getting anything for it. That's true, and eventually it will be. But there's going to be an extinction burst, which means that first time that they go to the supermarket and they don't give that child a chocolate bar, they are in for the tantrum of tantrums. They are in for the hurricane of tantrums, right? It's just going to be over the top. It's going to be worse than ever before. And when they go back the next time, it is still going to be worse than ever before. And it's at that point where somebody without a education in psychology will say, this is stupid, this isn't working. I wasn't giving my child chocolate bars thinking that the tantrums will get worse. These tantrums are so much, tantrums will get, will decrease. These tantrums are so much worse now. Like my child has never hit me, and now they're hitting me. My child has never thrown cereal boxes from the aisles, from the shelf. Now they are. This treatment isn't working. A psychologist will look at that and they'll say, yeah, the behavior's gotten worse. The treatment's working because we are now going through extinction burst. So again, it's just one of those examples of why we do what we do, because well-meaningful behavior doesn't mean anything unless you can get those results. And we'll see that, and it was tragic that in Harry's case, it was the care and love of his parents and their well-intentioned behavior